I attend a college that's located in one of the poorest cities in Northern California. The campus is relatively safe, since the school employs its own department of public safety. But after the sun sets, it's a good call to just remain indoors. That's when all the townies come out, and they tend to wander into campus somehow or another. Now, about 2 years ago, I was living in an apartment complex on the main part of campus, and I didn't have my own car yet. It was the end of the fall semester, and I was the last person in my apartment of 3 girls to finish taking my finals. Because of this, I was home all alone. I had just gotten back from taking my last exam and followed my usual routine of dejectedly collapsing into my bed to cry and sleep off the effects of pulling all-nighters. When I finally awoke once more, it was already past 10 p.m., and I was completely starving. Unfortunately, the student grocery store and cafeteria were already closed for the day, and I had nothing in the apartment to eat. I had no car to go get food elsewhere either. I was woefully poking around in my fridge in the hopes I would find something substantial to tide me over, at least until morning. It was at that moment I noticed a Domino's coupon that someone had stuck onto the freezer. My stomach's pathetic cries for sustenance had been answered. I quickly decided there was no shame in ordering a whole pizza plus Cinesticks for myself, because 1, I was feeling ravenous, and 2, the completion of finals demanded a celebration. And plus, if anyone happened to ask, I'd just lie and say I was sharing it with a friend or two, something along those lines. Anyway, I eagerly ordered up my feast for 1 and provided the cashier with my address, apartment, and cell number. I typically never gave out my number to anyone, but I had ordered delivery from this Domino's in the past, and I knew they needed my number to call me once more when they were outside. Those drivers would always get lost trying to navigate through campus, although I can't say I particularly blame them. About 20 minutes later, I got the call. My food was here. For reference, it was close to midnight now. The campus was pretty much dead since most students had already gone home. The driver told me that he had parked in front of the dorm building that was right across the street from my apartment. I hustled out my apartment and was going down the stairs when I spotted the delivery guy waiting outside his car with my pizza. At that exact moment, my sense of caution kicked in. I slowed down my pace as my brain took in the fact that A, there were no other students out, and B, the lighting was really bad in this spot. Essentially, I'd be walking up to a complete stranger with his car that he still had his engine running right next to him. As I neared the bottom of the steps, I silently hoped he would cross the street and approach me so I wouldn't have to get anywhere near that area. Well, of course, that didn't happen. I made my way across the street and was finally able to get a good look at him. He was a relatively short Hispanic-looking guy, maybe 5'7" or so. He was in his early 20s, and my nerves were getting bombarded by the creeper vibes he was giving off. I can only compare it to that vibe you get when you're out clubbing and you suddenly spot some guy lurking in the crowd, sporting the slick-back ponytail, sunglasses, and oversized shirt, who just happens to be headed right in your direction. I did my best to appear calm and keep the mood light and friendly. He made some comments about how late it was and how no one else was around. I quickly signed the receipt, gave him my thanks and an awkward smile, and hightailed it out of there as soon as he handed over my food. I could feel him watching me as I climbed the stairs back to my place. Once I got back into my apartment, I locked and chained the door and sat down on the living room couch to calm myself. After a few moments, I shrugged off the situation. Surely I was just being paranoid and my overactive imagination was acting up again. I just turned on the television and was about to take my first bite of the pizza when I got a text from an unknown number. I connected the dots pretty fast and matched the text number to the call I had received earlier from the pizza delivery guy. My initial reaction was shock, since nothing like this had ever happened to me before. That eventually melted away into laughter and disbelief when I considered him calling me sexy and my appearance in that moment. Like I had mentioned earlier, I just woken up from a nap after taking my last final. I was wearing a raggedy pair of sweatpants with a bunch of holes, a loose sweatshirt, and my hair was tied in a messy ponytail. My face was probably greasier than the pizza. Definitely not a pretty picture. The next morning, I got a call from my boyfriend John and casually told him about that pizza delivery driver, who casually signed his name in the text as Phil. I also told him all the events that transpired the previous evening. After sheepishly trying to defend my actions on the basis of poor judgment caused by extreme hunger, John convinced me to report his weirdness to campus police, at least as a precautionary measure. I gave them a call, and an officer stopped by my apartment a few hours later. I relayed my story. He took some pictures of the text messages and wrote down Phil's phone number. The officer then told me he would contact the Domino's if I wanted him to, but it would most likely result in Phil's termination. So far, I didn't really think the whole situation was that big a deal, honestly. I told the officer I just wanted to make sure that he wouldn't do this to me or anyone else again. At the same time, though, I didn't really think it was bad enough for him to lose his job or anything. The officer started asking questions about how I felt after my encounter. Questions along the lines of, did you feel threatened by Phil? Do you feel safe in your apartment with the knowledge he has both your phone number and your exact address? I began to get a little more scared during the course of my questioning. I had broken out in a cold sweat as my traitorous imagination began conjuring up all sorts of dastardly situations. I ended up giving the officer the go-ahead to pursue my case and contact the Domino's. About a month later, while I was at home celebrating the holidays, I got a call from my boyfriend. I had left him the keys to my apartment so he could store his bike there and crash in my room while I was away. He told me that he had stopped by my place, but couldn't get in because the keys were not working for some reason. It looked like someone had broken in. There was glass on the floor and a wooden board across my living room window. I was pretty upset, so I called the school the next day to figure out what the hell happened. Housing transferred my call to the public safety department, and the officer I spoke with was only able to tell me that according to the records, a maintenance worker had called them 2 days after I headed home to report that broken window. Public safety had responded by boarding the window and changing the lock when they noticed it had been tampered with. I convinced the officer to let my boyfriend in to check if anything was stolen. Nothing had been moved at all. I knew who did it. It was Phil who tried to pick my lock and broke my window. It scares me even more when I consider the fact that nothing was stolen. My flat-screen TV was right by the window that had been broken, and my boyfriend's fancy road bike was sitting right there in the living room. Why hadn't he stolen anything? His intentions were to break in, maybe to try and get revenge on me, the girl that had cost him his job. Would this still have happened if I had not given the officer permission to pursue the case? I didn't try to spend too much time speculating about what his true intentions were, but whenever I think about it, it still makes my heart race when I think about what could have happened if I'd still been in my apartment around that time. This was about 6 months ago, in the summer in the southern hemisphere. Here, I tend to order a fair bit of pizza, since hunger is a thing. Pizza is pretty much my only option for delivery, and since I don't have a car, I can't drive to get something myself. I'm the kind of girl who doesn't wear pants if I don't have to. Even if the weather's 25 degrees, no pants for me. I have one pair of shorts that I love to wear, but I only ever wear it around the house. Obviously, I put those on, as I was expecting a pizza delivery person, and I couldn't exactly just open the door in my underwear. I opened the door and accepted the pizza, and began to eat my dinner by the television. Not too long into my meal, though, I got a message on my phone. I've deleted the messages since, of course, but in the first message, this sender called me by my name. That was pretty strange, as anyone who knew me referred to me by my nickname. They asked if I was home alone, with a winking face. Okay, well, this was pretty creepy. Who exactly was this person? Between me asking who on earth this could be and how they'd gotten my number, probably a mistake on my part, they began to describe exactly what I was wearing. I started to get a horrible sinking feeling. This person had my number, my name, and knew exactly how I was dressed. I realized the only way they could possibly know this is if they were the guy who just delivered my pizza. I had to use my name and number to order, and if that was the case, this person also knew where I lived. I put the number into Google and checked the first few results that came up. I saw the person was a local, and I had actually seen this person around before as well. Realizing they were in my part of town was the worst part, as they were in the perfect position to stalk, harass me, or continue to be creepy. I drew up all the blinds, crawled into bed, and pretty much made myself into a blanket burrito. I stayed as still as I could for a few hours. I was scared out of my wits. They did keep trying to contact me over the next few days, but luckily I didn't hear from the person again after threatening them with police action. So I work at a pizza place, usually inside, as my insurance does not cover claims when driving for business. Occasionally, I will cover a delivery shift for one of the drivers though, because the money is pretty good. The delivery area includes a few new developments, upper middle-class cookie-cutter neighborhoods, an older 1940s Arab village, 2 apartment complexes, some trailer parks, and a bunch of more rural areas. Not exactly to the point of seeing hundreds of stars at night or anything, but enough that you couldn't hear your neighbors if they were to yell. About a week ago, I was covering for one of these shifts. I come back to the shop feeling pretty good. I was averaging $5 a delivery, and they'd all been pretty close as well. I checked to see if we had any more outgoing deliveries. All of a sudden, I saw an address I had never seen before. We mostly only had regular customers, so an address that didn't seem the least bit familiar was somewhat out of the ordinary. It was out on one of those more rural roads. I asked the kid who'd taken the order what was up, because there was a special instruction on the ticket as well. He said the person who called said to go around back because the front door, I guess, was inoperational for some reason. Okay, well, that wasn't uncommon. People often want you to go around the back. Either they're painting the front door, the house has shifted and it's a bitch to open, or they just like hanging out in their backyard, whatever. So, as I'm driving out to this house, I get an odd feeling. I really didn't like the idea of going to the back of some house, way out in the sticks. It would be all too easy for some thugs to order a pizza to an abandoned house. There are quite a few of those in the more rural areas. Then they'd jump the delivery guy, obviously. I figured I'd scope the place out a bit when I got there first. If it seemed too sketchy, I'd just call them and make up some bull about how it's against company policy to go around the back of houses to prevent robberies. As I'm driving up, I realize it's toward the end of this road that gets less and less populated the further down you went. Great. I was pretty near the address now, and I started to slow down. I came upon this house, an abandoned-looking building set up from the road with no address and surrounded by a bunch of trees. I thought to myself, this house better not be it. I drive past and checked the next house's address, and lo and behold, the abandoned-looking one with no number seemed to be the right house. Well, fuck this. At this point, I was not super worried though. Out in the boonies, the standards of houses are pretty low, so a house in disrepair is not too unusual. I doubled back to this house and pulled into the driveway. I started getting bad vibes immediately. Something didn't feel right. I parked my car at the very end of the driveway, with the rear of the car on the shoulder, so anyone passing by could very clearly see it. At this point, I called back into the shop and told them the house was very sketchy. If I didn't call back in 4 minutes to call me, if I didn't answer to call the cops. While I was on the phone, I took a chance to observe the house a little bit closer. I could see now that it looked extremely abandoned, not just in disrepair. The driveway itself was disintegrating. There were weeds growing out of the gravel. No mailbox, no trash can, no car, no landscaping, no toys, absolutely nothing in the yard. It looked like it hadn't been mowed in years. With a closer look, I could see the roof was falling apart and the siding was falling apart as well. The back deck, which came around to the side, had almost disintegrated completely. The only part of the house that looked even a little bit decent was the allegedly non-functioning front door. The windows were all closed shut and all had the blinds and curtains drawn as well. A few were actually boarded up. I couldn't even see any electrical wiring running to this house. It wasn't dark completely, but it was dusk. There were no signs of any lights around. I was starting to get very nervous. I'm a 5'10" male and 180 pounds. I'm not in super great shape, but I'm not a complete wimp either. I'm not helpless, but I do try to avoid any sort of confrontation. I wasn't too concerned about getting robbed. No skin off my teeth. That's not my money anyway. I mean, I'd rather not, sure. What I was mostly worried about was getting jumped and killed. It was a fairly safe area, but recently there had been some more rather unsavory people moving in from the city. A big spike in home invasions and robberies. Even more worrying, a few stabbings and assaults as well. It was time to either nut up or shut up though. I was not about to go charging in there like a fool, so I got out my phone and called the number they'd given when ordering. While I was doing that, I was also getting the pizza out and making sure to leave my door open. A running car half in the road and an abandoned house with the door wide open looks really suspicious, right? If shit went down, at least it would look out of place enough to make someone stop. Not that there was any traffic this far down the road. I was starting to walk up to the house as the phone continued to ring. It rang twice, and then an automated message started to play. This number is associated with an internet texting app, the free ones you download that let you send free text from a different phone number over a data connection. I think it was Haywire or something. We'd had issues with people using numbers from those services for pranks in the past. This was a huge red flag. My heart was pounding in my throat, and my whole body was telling me to bail. Still, I didn't want to get a reputation of being a flaky driver and lose any potential for future delivery shifts. That's why I'd not bailed yet. I'm just standing there holding the pizza, looking at this house but not daring to venture around the back. I was hoping the resident would look out the window and come out by the road to get their food. I'm looking in through the front windows, checking for any signs of life. At this point, I see a blind pop up on one window next to the front door, and a really creepy-looking guy with a hat pulled over his face and huge sunglasses looking out. There was no reason for him to be wearing those. I could see a big guy standing right behind him in the room, too. When he saw me looking, he mouthed something and darted away, presumably toward the allegedly broken front door. At this point, I got the fuck out of there. I had stayed close to my car, so it was only a few steps away. I jumped into the driver's seat and threw the pizza into the passengers. That was something I would never really do, since I was really anal about keeping my car clean. I slammed into reverse before I even got the clutch all the way in. I grinded my gears a little, again something I never did without looking. I simultaneously slammed and locked my door and floored it backwards onto the main road. I didn't even check for cross traffic, really stupid on my part. I started to drive away and looked back toward that house. The screen door on the outside of the front door was now open, but the front door was still shut. The guy wasn't out in the yard yelling or anything. He'd seemingly just disappeared. I pulled over a little ways up the road and called back to the shop. I told them I was fine, and I'd tell them everything else when I got back. Those people never called back to inquire about their food. People will usually call irate if the pizza's 15 minutes late. These people never got it at all, so it's really strange they never called. Pretty much a confirmation they were up to no good. After telling the coworkers about it, we concluded it was definitely a robbery at the very least. We put the address and phone number on our no deliveries list, and we all shared the pizza together. Now, I doubt I would have gotten murdered or anything like that. Robbed maybe, a gun pulled with a little roughing up, sure, but it was still very unnerving. I easily could have gotten into some serious trouble just by doing my job, especially if the idiots took a slightly less abandoned house to stake out. When I was 10 years old, it was not uncommon for my siblings and I to dig around outside. On this particular day, I was tired out from the day before, and so I decided to stay inside this time. I would occasionally look outside to make sure everyone was okay and doing well. I was a paranoid small child due to some former trauma that I had experienced when I was much younger. Well, after my third glance outside, I noticed that my cousin and brother were now standing at the end of the gravel driveway, talking to some pizza man, it seemed. I turned to my mother and asked her if we'd ordered pizza, maybe as a surprise or something. Immediately, my mom turned to the door and bolted outside screaming. The sounds of tires screeching could be heard. My mom rushed back inside with my brother, cousin, and sister. After asking what happened, my brother and cousin went on to explain that this random pizza guy, in his late 20s or so, had suddenly pulled up and asked the boys if they wanted some free pizza. Of course, being small kids, they were readily willing to accept such an offer. He told them the pizzas were in the back, and if they wanted them, they would have to climb into his car. That's luckily when my mom ran towards the car, yelling obscenities. Thankfully, whoever it was threatened enough by my mom that he sped off right away. Two weeks ago, I was home alone when the doorbell suddenly rang. I asked who it was, and the person outside called out, "Oh, it's pizza delivery." I hadn't ordered a pizza. When I looked out to peek at the person, they were indeed carrying a pizza box with them, but something about them was off. They didn't have a uniform or any other paraphernalia, or even a pizza bag. I didn't even see a car outside. I told the person I didn't order any pizza, and he left in a hurry. I peeked out my window once again and saw him now across the street at my neighbor's home. I didn't really think anything of it at the time, since I thought maybe they were the ones who'd ordered the pizza and he'd simply mixed up the address or something. I went back to what I was doing, which was playing video games at the time, I believe. Well, as it turns out, the guy robbed my neighbors that night. Pretty scary stuff. I probably could have stopped that if I'd called the police. But in the moment, I wasn't really thinking too deeply about it. Now that I take note of it after though, in hindsight, he was carrying a Little Caesars box with him, which is pickup only.